Hi, guys. I'm really excited to be moderating this panel. I have a group of wonderful, intelligent women on the stage with me. I have Jen, Joyce, and Kielley. And I was already introduced. I'll let them introduce themselves. But I think my role today, for the next 30 minutes or so, is to really create a conversation that everyone in the room can learn from. So panelists, please feel free to, if you want to go in order or not, or just have a conversation, whatever you want. But we're going to be talking about mining first-party data to create a robust strategy. I want to ask questions around what kind of data they're using, how they're integrating it with other sources, how it's feeding back into a holistic strategy, so it should be a good one. Do you guys want to introduce yourselves?
Sure, I'll go first since I'm sitting right next to you. My name is Jen Muse, Jen or Jennifer, I'm not a Jenny. I currently work at General Mills. I lead CRM, e-commerce for our global team. It's a brand new team. We were formed in May, literally, so brand new. But I do sit across the brands. So CRM, loyalty strategy, and I came from L'Oreal previously, where I was working for Urban Decay Cosmetics in pretty much the same role.
Hi, is this on? Yeah. Hi, I'm Joyce with Joyce Szudzik. I always forget to say the last name, and then I'm told it's very important to always say your last name, especially my last name when you don't know how to pronounce it. So Joyce Szudzik with AEG, the largest company you probably have never heard of. We are basically competitors to Live Nation, and I see Matt is not in the room, so I can talk about things. But AEG runs about 180 venues around the world. We're the second largest concert promoter, and we also have a couple sports teams under our belt, and it's a very diversified portfolio. Unlike Live Nation, which owns everything in their portfolio, we do not. So it makes our structure very interesting. But my role currently is on social strategy and cross-marketing and data governance with all of that.
Cool. I'm Kielley Young. I work for Warner Music Group as a campaign strategist. So I sit in the center of all of the record labels and tell our marketers how to find their audiences and use their audiences properly.
Great. Joyce, let's start with you because your first-party data seems a little bit, opportunities and challenges is working with other people. What kind of first-party data are you using right now, and how are you using it?
So our first-party data basically comes to us from the various multitude of ticketing systems that we're sending to you as a ticket buyer. So whether you're in a venue that's ticketed by Ticketmaster or a venue that's ticketed by Access, we have multiple sources of data coming in. That allows us, very similar to how Matt said yesterday with Live Nation, we know who purchased the ticket. We don't know the 3 friends that are going with that individual. So our first-party data is limited to that individual, and then we have to extrapolate out from there. Very similarly, we don't necessarily know the household, so it's a little bit of an understanding that, yes, you may have wanted to go to Carrie Underwood, but you also have an 18-year-old in the house that just went to Panic at the Disco. So being able to target and grow our first-party affinity and understand who else is in that household helps grow that out. But being able to leverage a lot of newsletters, which include multiple numbers of shows that are probably in about the same demographic and genre related, is how we're targeting at an initial standpoint for newsletters to bring them in. And I'm sure we'll keep talking on how else we're doing that.
I just want to build on that because that's very interesting, and I want to give everyone time to speak. But it's interesting because you said you had kind of limited first-party data, but what you're doing with that data is very significant and robust and sophisticated. So what kind of tools and technologies are you using to combine that data and find those insights? What's your platform that you're using, or how do you combine all these sources?
We're in the process of doing that. So AEG is literally a multitude of holding companies. So the LA Kings have their data over here. Golden Voice and Coachella have their data over here. So we're maybe 90% there and pulling it all into Microsoft Azure, however you want to pronounce it. We have a British person in the office building it, and he says it completely like different. But we're pulling it into Xert, and then we're able to model it. So we've got some Python happening out there, and we've got 4 different data scientists on board right now that are modeling that data and making it clean so that our marketers in those different venues can just put a couple buttons and pull out the data without having to know MySQL.
Great.
Which has been historically what they've been doing.
Yeah, that's a lot of work. And room for error, too.
Yeah, and then it automatically feeds into, depending on the email marketing program that we have, Yes Mail has just been launched in a few of our different areas. We have Marketo on the sports side. We have Adobe on the access ticketing side. So it's all speaking very differently to how it's coming into those platforms, and then basically creating that nice drag, drop, click where a marketer can easily be able to pull a list that match the attributes for the event that they're promoting.
Great. Jen, what's going on in General Mills?
Great, loaded question.
What's going on? Everything.
What's going on? Yeah.
What's
So
the
I
goss?
started in May, so it's been a lot of really like peeking under the covers and figuring things out. It's really interesting because it's the first time I've worked, one, for a CPG and a food CPG, but 2, with a company where I'm not fully in control of a brand. So again, I sit on the global team, and General Mills has hundreds of brands. And I would say one of the biggest challenges has been the different brands are all at different stages in terms of their use of data, the technologies they're using. There's not like centralized systems that we're using. And then it's also hard because the way that e-commerce is looked at General Mills is what sales are we driving at the end of the day. And so a lot of the marketing initiatives that we have and the first party data that we have, it's very minimal, first of all. So we have social media feeds, box top initiatives, you know, Pillsbury, Betty Crocker, Annie's, Cheerios. A lot of our brands have that, so there's data there. We're not driving a lot of traffic to the site because any display is mostly used to say, hey, here's a coupon, go buy, you know, your Honey Nut Cheerios at the Walmart that's like in your neighborhood. And then not all of our brands send email. So it's very disparate. It's a different world for each and every one of the brands. And so for me and my role and why my team was formed to begin with is we're trying to build a more holistic look at what the brands are doing from a CRM perspective and also connect the dots. So I know you were asking about vendors, and I know Salesforce is a sponsor here, so I can say that we're very far down the road with Salesforce to build that CRM stack, to really use technologies like their DMP to say, okay, we know Debbie in Wisconsin, you know, shops at Kroger down the street. She usually does her shopping on a Saturday. She looks at her mobile app to see, you know, what the weather is, if it's a good time of day to go out. She brings her kids to the store. She's on her social media looking for new products and things like that. That doesn't exist today at General Mills. There's not a holistic look at what the consumers are doing. So that's something that I and my team are really trying to enable for a lot of our different brands. It's obviously a very large undertaking given the size of General Mills. So we're starting with a couple brands, which I don't know if I can say it, so I won't. But we're starting with a couple brands in North America to really see if we can prove out and you know, show the other brands how valuable CRM is and how important it is to look at the consumer journey, which isn't equal for each and every consumer. So.
Kielley, what about you?
Just our whole approach. Okay. So,
How are you using data, and what kind of projects are you working on now?
So our data is managed at the center from our central team. So we have about 32 million unique records. The tricky part is that we're siloed by artist. So everyone is broken out. So Bruno Mars has his own list. Ed Sheeran has his own list. So that is not super scalable. The other problem is that we have is off cycle. So Bruno's on tour for, let's say, or like there's an album release cycle of 18 months. What happens to those people when he's off cycle? So right now we're trying to move everyone into one larger list so that we can sort of cross-sell artists.
I think a theme that I heard each and every one of you say is silo, you know, and that's just very common, with multiple brands and multiple companies, and not just silos, but using multiple tech stacks and tools. I think Kielley knowing that you're trying to move things in a centralized way, how do you even start that process? Like, who are you working with internally, and what's the approach, even in the beginning?
I'm working with myself and like 2 other people.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, so our approach has been, we know you like Bruno Mars, we think you'll be interested in this artist. Or, hey, there's this Bruno Mars playlist. Do you want to hear more about playlists like this from our playlist brand Tops 5? Why don't we drive you to a purchase in Bruno's store, and there's an opt-in at checkout that adds you to a centralized list. So there is a multifaceted approach. I think it's more, once we get people on the central list, how do we know who they actually like? And they were probably a super fan, which is why they opted in the first place. So getting them to buy into anything else is a little bit trickier. So tour is like the bait for everything. People love live shows, so that's sort of where we try to move people, right? Hey, you saw Bruno on tour. Did you also like who opened? Cardi B opened for him. Do you like Cardi B? That doesn't perform great in emails. Cardi B, for some reason, forgot this was live streamed. So, but that kind of approach. So touring.
And I'd love to add on that if I can. I think that one of the things that's been challenging for General Mills, and it's similar to your challenge, is we have assumptions. So we know, for example, the mom who's buying Annie's and is concerned about, organic, healthful food, or her kid has celiac or whatever. So we know that, she'll probably also buy some similar products to Cheerios. But one of the things that we also want to utilize Salesforce for is, again, using the DMP to say, okay, so we have assumptions, we know core consumer groups, but how do we get unknown to known and reach other audiences that we might not assume would be an Annie's customer? I think a perfect example is I run around San Francisco where I live, and I'll meet people all the time that are adult males in their 20s, and they're like, oh my gosh, Annie's mac and cheese is my jam. And that is clearly not the person we're targeting, but that should be somebody that we're targeting. So it's how to use data to sort of mine and find those new audiences in addition to connecting the consumer journey for audiences that we know.
I have a lot of fun in this space right now, and I'm working with our business intelligence team to really kind of build it out, where social strategy is coming in to shape actual business decisions. I'm past, just uploading my first-party data and targeting on Facebook that performs better than any other list that we have, and means of advertising, certainly, as it would be expected. But how do you shape what's next? What do people want? What are they actually interested in? How are you using that data point in order to predict, am I going to sell 3,000 tickets to this show, or am I going to sell 8,000 tickets to this show? And that impacts a lot of different things along the life cycle, whether it goes to our marketing budget or future shows that we're actually booking, because we can dodge some bullets and maybe not book a show into this huge arena, but maybe put them into this nice mid-sized theater where you can get out on what you're paying the band, and everybody's happy at the end of the day. So from a strategy perspective, we're also looking at what people want. What are they saying? What are they talking about? And then how can we pull that in and overlay that against our ticket sales that we have in real time to understand what's working and what's not working from an organic perspective, but also use that to kind of shape what we're doing from an advertising perspective to know, well, this audience over here is really engaged on Instagram, but this audience over here is really big on Twitter and Snapchat, of course. You can't listen to that one yet. But it's really trying to figure out how we can pull that data in to inform business decisions on top of our marketing strategy and how we're targeting audiences.
I mean, this gives me a lot of confidence. All three of you are doing very sophisticated, data mining and insights to feed into a marketing strategy. I do want to get a little bit kind of into the logistics, because all these wonderful things that you're doing, I'm an agency gal, right? So I do a lot of different things for my clients. A lot of times clients come to me and they want my team, the unicorns, as Andrew said yesterday, to do all the kind of insights and data mining for their team, because they're lean and mean. But some teams on client sides have their own internal structure. Who on your teams are doing this kind of data insight work? Because it's a lot. Do you have internal teams? What do you outsource to agencies? Do you lean on people like Salesforce? What's the logistics? Because I think everyone in this room have different size businesses. Not everyone has internal, robust business intelligence teams.
Business intelligence, I think, it's a broad term. So on the CRM team, we have 2 data analysts who are awesome at their jobs. And also we have a really good structure of feedback loops. So anything that anyone clicks is automatically being just driven back into our database. And that's mostly where the data set is growing, I think. But Scott and Luke are pretty key in being able to look across the data set and say, like, okay, this is what, or develop reporting, where I can look and say, like, this is what grew this week, and that means that maybe the Spotify audience is larger than the Apple Music audience, and maybe we should be focusing there.
Right, so it's you and your data analyst team kind of looking at the reports every week, making sure the data is correct, and then feeding that back into your wider team for marketing strategy.
Right, I think it's also like, hey, we didn't make money on this week. Is that something actually wrong with the program, and we didn't realize it?
Yeah.
Seeing the flaws.
Yeah, and I like to be the troublemaker in the group, where, you know, I've been a concert marketer, shocker, I've been a concert marketer for over 25 years, and there's that gut, that nuance, that ego that we were talking about yesterday, that, you know, there's got to be that balance in the data set, or you do have the baby clicking the buy button 1,000 times and the ships are going across the sea. That's a great video. You need to balance the data with actual insights on what you know about that audience. I mean, I remember, you know, when data was first really, you know, big data was the buzz, you know, 8 years ago or 10 years ago, whatever it was. We were working on the Bon Jovi tour, which is thankfully Live Nation now. Have fun. They're amazing. I mean, they're so intense. They're on every detail. It's fabulous. John is amazing, but it's like, okay already. Facebook is where we should have been advertising. The entire audience database for Bon Jovi on Facebook, which was one of the bigger ones at the time, was saying I should be advertising to 24 to 29-year-olds. You have been to a Bon Jovi show, it is 45-year-olds, and maybe there's a little bit of that segment there, but not the propensity that Facebook says. You have to balance real life and who that product is, that 20-year-old walking down the street eating Annie's, and you know, you have to balance life with data. So with everything in our data points, I'm like, yes, I can absolutely pull a list for Carrie Underwood, which just went on sale last week across the country, buy tickets now, and send an email out, or do a Facebook audience from our past Carrie Underwood tours. My numbers are going to be through the roof on open rates and clicks and whatnot, because that's a super highly targeted audience. They bought before, they were going to buy again. I call it almost cooking the books. Of course I'll have great numbers. Look, boss, I got great ROI on this campaign. But what you don't understand is all the people that would have maybe bought, the affinity audience, and it's understanding who else that first-party data can get you to, that maybe, you know what, maybe it's WWE. You know, so maybe I should have sent the email to that audience, and it would have sold really well for Carrie Underwood. And with our data analysis in the office, we are building the BI team is built out now. It depends on the division that you're in. Sports is a whole nother section. What the Kings and the Galaxy are doing is crazy with the data points on sports. But with music, we're trying to build those data insights to figure out who that core is, and then really extrapolate out the lookalikes, as you call it, and then balance that with the marketer. And, well, I know I've been to this show, and I know what this is, and I know what that is, so we should put a little of this in and a little of that in. And maybe it goes in a separate list to test. But you have to balance the data, and that's the biggest thing I'm pushing right now.
I mean, there's that word of incrementality again, right? The incremental audiences and those kind of affinity audiences. All of you, a question to the group is, knowing that, especially with the Bon Jovi example of the Facebook page, it's interesting because, you know, second and third party data is, you know, I don't know if first party data can do all the heavy lifting. There's so many incremental insights that you can learn for scale from second and third party. How are you combining, and what second and third party data sources are you using to go after those incremental audiences and those lookalike audiences?
That's a great question. I think it's a huge challenge for General Mills and, again, for CPGs. What I've also found is, I've been there in the short time that I have been there, is we do first-party data to sort of drive audiences to whatever we want to drive them to, which again is mostly like to wherever they're going to ultimately buy. And then we use third-party data from Amazon, Walmart, Alibaba, you name it, to say what's selling. There's not a lot of driving and connecting the funnel. So first-party data, second-party data, third-party data, and how are we moving consumers down that journey. Ultimately, as me in my role, I want you to buy, again, to use Annie's, I want you to buy Annie's. I don't care where you buy it. But I want you to buy it, and I want to know, like, where are you buying it from? Like, where did you get that message? Was it because you were on your phone and you got an SMS text and you happen to be at Kroger or whatever that is? And there's just not a lot. And I do think part of it is just the culture of being such a storied CPG. The mentality to really connect data and use data in terms of looking at a consumer basis versus sales isn't there. And so that is why, for somebody like me, it's super exciting. It's a huge challenge. There's a lot of work to be done, but really trying to move the needle and connect the dots between first-party, second-party, third-party data is definitely going to be a large part of my role.
I think of it as, not boiling the ocean as well. There's so many different data points out there that you can be collecting on, whether it's you swiped your credit card to purchase a beer at the concession stands in one of our venues, or you were listening to that band on Spotify on the car on the way in, to geolocation and geofencing and the data points we can get when you tag Instagram location. There's a multitude of data points that you can be pulling in. The more data points you're pulling in, the more noise you're also creating, which muddles the insights. So trying to be able to understand and prioritize what is the most important data point to pull in for your business, how are you getting it, how are you modeling it, focus on certainly what works first, and then pull your other fun points, your bright, shiny objects, into a sandbox. Let your analyst play with it on the side and see if it's something there, but prioritize those on what's performing a little bit better. And that's some of the experiments that we're conducting right now, is trying to figure out, because there's so many data points, what is not the bright, shiny object and what actually is moving the meter.
Yeah, simple is key. Yeah. It really is.
Can I add on? Sorry, Kielley, before you go. So I think that's such a great point, because you can have all the data in the world and not know what to do with it. Yeah. I'll give an example at Urban Decay of something that was really helpful. And I think it all starts, to your point, you need to have a very clearly defined business objective and then look at the data to drive whatever that solution is. So at Urban Decay, we were seeing a fall off. So we launched a loyalty program. And all of a sudden, it was great. It was very successful at acquiring new customers. Found out, guess what? Surprise! Like our free shipping price point used to be a minimum of $50. With this loyalty program, we're like, hey, sign up, it's free. No obligation. You get free shipping on every order. So our AOV went from $55, which was, again, to get free shipping just above that threshold, to $23. So using the data to say, well, that clearly is a hashtag fail, because not only were they not spending enough, but they weren't coming back. So we had a lot of people that would open their Vogue, oh, here's like the shade of the season, whatever, and they'd buy it and then ghost us. So what we ended up doing is looking at the data to say, okay, what is that threshold between first purchase and second purchase, wherein if you don't make your second purchase within, let's just call it a 45-day window, then we're most likely not going to see you again. So we use the data to say what was that threshold, what was that inflection point, and then we got ahead of it. And so then if we hadn't seen them, we would say, hey, haven't seen you in a while, like here's something you might like, and then hit them with a couple of other touch points. And then ultimately, if they didn't convert, because we weren't a discounting brand, then we would say, like right before the 45-day threshold, so let's just say day 40, we'd be like, all right, last chance, get free shipping on this order, or $10 off your order, or get a deluxe sample, or whatever it is. So I think, again, back to the original point, is you can have all the data in the world, but you really need to have a clearly defined strategy and a clearly defined objective to be able to use it effectively.
So in terms of second and third party data, we use it directionally at best, I would say, in terms of what I'm doing. Right, so I can look at Nielsen and say most of Cardi B's fan base is using the free model of Spotify. which, by the way, I don't think is accurate, so don't quote me on that. And then I can use her email list or her Facebook Messenger bot or any of those direct channels that we have to really push Spotify. But that's directional, right? And at the end of the day, am I losing out on that 35% of people who are on another streaming service? So I think that's where it's directional, but it's with a grain of salt, right? There are so many data points. So what do I really want to use? Like, do I stick with my strategy and just help me test with it, or what am I really doing there? So,
what are the KPIs that you as individuals are held?
Passive revenue. So abandoned carts, birthday emails, those merch modules on Spotify, those kinds of things.
It depends on the business unit, I mean, honestly, and what they're actually doing in the process. My focus right now really is on cross-marketing and social strategy, so it's a little bit different on understanding, is that database working and not working, and it's defined usually whether by engagement rate or open rate, depending on the mechanism, maybe. There's so many different components, it's difficult.
My world is very different because, again, CRM doesn't really exist today. So really, for me, and my challenge for this fiscal year is any incremental lift, whether that's in acquisition, whether that's in sales, whether that's in retention, is going to be looked at as a positive thing. And also, you know, a lot of my role is to really be political and to evangelize. Like, I'm not even kidding you. I was asked on a call last week, so what is this thing called CRM, and what does that mean? And I just sat there for a second and then just like took a deep breath and went for it. But yeah, so our KPIs are going to literally be like incrementality in terms of consumer engagement and sales.
Okay. One last question, maybe we can open up to the group. Hindsight's a beautiful thing, isn't it? Is there an example of something, this company that you work at now or a previous job, where you learned a big lesson that you want to share with the group and how you would handle using first-party data or data insight, like a lesson?
So it's actually similar to something you said before. The concept of over-personalization, but also, and I spoke about it very early on, because we have everyone in individual artist lists, that's typically how we treat them, right? We assume that if you signed up for Ed's list, you're into singer-songwriters. But I guess at like during my second year, we accidentally sent a VIP ticketing email for a very well-known, like early 90s female singer-songwriter whose team is pretty difficult.
Mariah Carey? Oh my God, is Mariah Carey?
No. That would be super amazing, but it's definitely
Oh, Mariah
not.
Carey.
No.
Meltdown.
We sent her VIP ticketing email to a WWE audience by accident. But it performed really well. And it was like just a total F up. It really took me a second to pull that back. But it performed well, and I think that it sort of opened my eyes about like the concept of generalizing about what people like, and also making sure to step back and say like, oh, the data that I know and that I have in front of me all the time isn't the data that's necessarily the most important. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really similar to that, and understanding more education in the process. And not everybody in the organization is at the same knowledge level of the space as you are in order to get the investment from the CFO to allow you to write that multi-million-dollar check for a piece of technology and that you need, and it's going to change the world and revolutionize how you do marketing, is understanding, you know, top down, more education, and especially I'd say now more so than ever, but I would have done more education earlier on of different stakeholders in the company so that it would be easier to get additional tools and investments that we need to be able to do this a little bit better.
And I would say a success story. I worked back in the day for an Amazon subsidiary that is no longer, it's Quidsy, so 10 e-commerce websites. And we were on an ESP, an external ESP. We built it and brought it in-house. Part of the reason, like you were saying, having data siloed and things like that. So with 10 e-commerce brands, we had consumable and non-consumable brands. So bringing it in-house, we were able to really refine the first-party data to say, I want to look at somebody who shopped at, diapers.com was one site, in the last 30 days, and maybe they shopped previously and they added something to cart at Beauty Bar, which was a beauty brand. Not necessarily brands you would connect, but we would say, okay, we know they've shopped both of these sites. We've seen them on one site recently. We haven't seen them on another. So how can we use data to kind of connect that, see what the product affinities are, or make those connections, and then send out marketing messages, which was primarily email, to sort of win back customers and re-engage them and things like that. So again, that was a big win, but it was very important to have the first-party data in-house and usable and slice and diceable, so we could send segmented marketing messages that were smart.
Great. Lots of good information. Thanks, you guys.
Thanks.
Thank you, Megan, and thank you, panel. We have time for questions, so...
Hi, Dan Kidd with Data Wallet. A lot of great insights into the first-party data you have, but what about all the walled gardens and the first-party data they have? How do you mesh those two worlds of each of them and being so prominent in the advertising ecosystem along with what you're doing with the data you have directly?
So there are a lot of walled gardens in music. Almost every digital service provider in terms of music. So Amazon, Google Play, Spotify, iTunes, all of them are walled. So I can send a user in and cross my fingers that they streamed that song that I want them to stream. And we can look at Uplift, and I'm looking at Andrew, and things like that to measure it. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's a crapshoot. But I guess we get anonymized data out to some degree, so we're lucky in that sense. I don't really have a good answer, so I'm not sure why I took this one. But looking at Uplift is the only thing we really can do.
I have a... Yeah. Okay. I have a quick question for Joyce. Matthew Kenyon, Live Intent. Quick question. Can you share what you were saying about the sports teams? Was it the Kings? Just what they're doing that's different?
Being a sports team, you have different access to data points that a marketer dreams of in an aspect of growing up in concerts where you don't. It's an element of having the same brand, right? You have a team, they have X number of games in a same venue. I'm going to make it up, 80 games. It might be 100. Don't quote me on that. For hockey, Galaxy Soccer has lower number of games, but still that 6 months out of the year you're playing. So in that same venue, when you're on the road, it's a different set of metrics. So whether you have data points coming in from TV viewership, streaming viewership, the content that you're able to produce because you own your team. You have access to players. You have access to even their performance metrics is becoming very huge right now as well. So all of that can play in. You have merch. You have that jersey with Kopitar's name on the back of it. So you can understand affinities to players, affinities to teams, opponents in such a different way, and how those insights on those data points you can pull in and understand and identify maybe who is ripe to be a season ticket holder, who is a season ticket holder but actually only goes to 5 games and they're selling their tickets on eBay or StubHub, not eBay, but StubHub, actually we did do eBay at one time, StubHub, any number of different resources, and you lose track of actually who is in the venue, who is that season ticket holder, and as that model is actually trying to shift right now away from season tickets. It's almost like the Uber of tickets right now, that universal Kleenex name is how do you move into different data points. So on the sports side, there's a different section of analysis going on and trying to understand what are consumers looking for today. They don't want that investment in a season ticket. They're busy. They're going to concerts. They're going on vacations. Life gets in the way. It's the kids' play that night at their school, and they can't make that same time commitment anymore. So it's shifting the model and understanding those data points to get to consumers to maybe it's a mini game package, or it's, you know, almost that consolidated group of it's a pool of tickets and you share, it's almost a timeshare of seats, and what that looks like and what's performing, and then the marketing messages that speak back, that helps. It's such a playground.
Yeah, question for Jennifer. Paul Friedland. Why CPG, or let me rephrase this. Why do you see CPG companies starting to push into e-commerce and digital, as I think fashion and beauty brands and a lot of other categories have been doing for years? What's the trigger that they woke up one morning and went, oh crap?
I think that's a great question, and it's something I actually asked myself as I was considering making the huge shift into CPG from my fashion, you know, e-commerce world. I think a lot of it is that it's such a congested market now, and there are brands, Cheerios is a perfect example, that have been around for so long and they're a household name and they're not evolving. They think they are. Nobody quote me on this, even though I know we are being recorded, but brands are understanding that they need to really be where the consumers are. And so, and it's not just the millennials. I can't remember who in one of the presentations yesterday was saying that, but it's, you know, and actually, was it Michael that was speaking to us from Fandango previously? Like, consumers today are very smart, and they don't want to be bothered. They're very busy. Like you said, the kids play, they're running around doing all these things, and so they consume data, and they consume, or they don't consume data, they consume marketing messaging in a different way, in the way that they want to consume it. And so I think for like a CPG category type of a play, they understand that you need to evolve, and you need to be in the digital space, you need to be in the e-commerce space, whether or not that purchase is still occurring in the brick and mortar grocery store, to reach your consumers and to reach new consumers and to utilize AI. Like I used to work with Matt Kenyon at Live Intent. You do need to complement what you're doing from a marketer, and there is some manual slicing and dicing of data, but there's always going to be that machine learning to, again, reach those consumers that you might not necessarily think about. So I think that that is the evolution in this space, and that is why General Mills, for example, is really doubling down and heavying up in e-commerce.
So Kielley, you and I have worked together, so I have a little bit of backstory there, but all three of you seem to have something that's similar, and I'm curious about, do each of your business units have their own P&Ls? I sort of know that you do, and you know, we've talked about this before. Atlantic has Led Zeppelin, and Rhino Records has the Grateful Dead, and they both should be able to sell each other's audiences to uplift their sales, right? That makes sense to me. Or hip hop across different things, but they don't because of the different silos. And I think General Mills might have that too. I'm wondering if it's an operational challenge that you have more than anything else. You're in the catbird seat where you could grow revenue for each of these different business units by sharing their data across each other, and yet when they show up at work every day, they're managing to their own P&L. And I'm just wondering if that's true, and if your KPIs are, help all these guys make money off each other, or not.
Go ahead, Kielley.
So I'm going to come at it from a little bit of a different perspective. Because at the end of the day, I'm more focused on the fan, right? There are so many people that I work with that are focused on making sure that we monetize our data in some way or another. But my first question always is like, did the fans sign up to receive marketing messages about another artist? And is that disclosed in our privacy policy? That's like my first go-to question always. For the most part, they did. We have pretty broad privacy policy. But that's always my concern. It's like, just because someone did indicate interest in Led Zeppelin, do I think that they'd like the Grateful Dead? Actually, probably not. That might be, a lot of people in this room might disagree with me on that, you included. So I think that that's always my concern. But I think that for us, the data is managed at the center, so it doesn't really matter. Like, if we convinced Atlantic to do it, they would. So yeah.
So you're exactly right, Andrew. Every brand, and actually even every division, so we've got North America, we've got Latin America, we've got Asia, we've got Europe. So it's not only KPIs, or excuse me, P&Ls by brand, it's also divisionally, and everybody's heads down. And so as I think I touched on it before, there are a lot of overlaps in terms of our consumers and our audiences, but there hasn't been any information sharing, there haven't been any campaigns where we are sort of mining and making those synergies and making those connections and really utilizing the strength of the huge General Mills in general, no pun intended, database to really have growth for each of these different divisions and brands. So that is something that I and my team are really trying to do and try to provide, is looking at the whole universe, not just brand by brand, but General Mills in total, and seeing like where can we leverage known customers, contactable customers, and really try to build out stronger business and better results for everybody.
Yeah, and thank you, GDPR. Big shout out there. It makes it a little more challenging sometimes to share data across different verticals, as well as, like Kielley's saying, it depends on the business you came in under, what the privacy policy was on that website at the time you came in. And likewise, it's pretty broad, but there's still some different attributes I have to be careful of, and especially since we're sending you to a third party to execute that ticket transaction. We're not the e-commerce side. So there's a whole nother layer of privacy policy involved. But with cross-marketing and data, it's really getting into data governance, understanding literally GDPR. California's coming out with a wicked law in a year and a half now that we're working actively to combat. But it's really understanding how you can make all the entities understand what they have. It goes back to that education and how they can use it. We can have one set that can do modeling off of it and see the whole pool that we have that we're pulling in. To be able to market off of it is that next step. We're doing tests against it right now, but likewise, just because they bought this show, it might not perform for that. So you have to have some different modeling and lots of sandboxes going to do tests.
Megan's going to